The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have. These words cut through the romantic fantasies we've built around love like a knife through silk. We live in an age obsessed with perfect love. Stories, soulmates, and happily ever afters. But what if I told you that this very obsession is destroying your capacity for genuine connection? Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher who lived in the shadow of his own impossible love, understood something about romance that we've forgotten. That our desperate need to idealize love is not a sign of our capacity for deep feeling, but evidence of our fundamental inability to face reality. While we scroll through social media, consuming curated moments of other people's relationships, we're building a prison of expectations that no human being could ever fulfill. You see, when you idealize love, you're not actually loving another person. You're loving your own projection, your own fantasy of what love should be. You're falling in love with love itself, not with the messy, complicated, beautifully flawed human being standing in front of you. This isn't romance. It's narcissism dressed up in flowery language and set to a soundtrack of your favorite love songs. Kierkegaard called this aesthetic existence, living for the beautiful moment, the perfect feeling, the transcendent experience. But here's what he discovered through his own tormented relationship with Regina Olsen. The more you chase the ideal, the further you drift from the real. Every actual person you meet will disappoint you because they cannot compete with the impossible standard you've created in your mind. Think about your last relationship. How much of your pain came not from who that person actually was, but from who you needed them to be? How much of your heartbreak was really just the shattering of an illusion you'd built around them? This is the first danger Kierkegaard warned us about. When we idealize love, we stop seeing people and start seeing possibilities. But the damage goes deeper than disappointment. When you approach love as an aesthetic experience, you turn the other person into an object for your consumption. They become a means to an end, the end being your own emotional fulfillment. You study them like a work of art, seeking the moments when they make you feel most alive, most validated, most complete. But people are not paintings hanging in a gallery for your contemplation. They are not symphonies composed for your listening pleasure. This aesthetic approach to love creates what Kierkegaard recognized as a fundamental imbalance. You become a spectator to your own life, always watching for the next beautiful moment, the next perfect feeling, the next confirmation that this is true love. You're not participating in a relationship, you're curating an experience. And the moment that experience stops delivering the aesthetic satisfaction you crave, you begin looking elsewhere. Consider how this plays out in the early stages of modern dating. We swipe through profiles like we're browsing a catalog, making split-second aesthetic judgments about human beings based on carefully curated images. We craft our own profiles to maximize aesthetic appeal, presenting idealized versions of ourselves, designed to trigger that initial spark of attraction. From the very beginning, we're teaching ourselves to approach love as consumers rather than participants. The tragedy is that this aesthetic approach to love makes genuine intimacy impossible. Intimacy requires seeing and being seen as you actually are, not as you wish you were, or as others need you to be. But when you're operating from an aesthetic framework, authenticity becomes the enemy, because it threatens the beautiful illusion you're trying to maintain. Kierkegaard lived his entire life as a bachelor, not because he couldn't love, but because he understood something profound about the nature of romantic idealization. He was engaged to Regina Olsen, a woman he adored, but he broke off the engagement because he realized that his love for her had become more about his own spiritual and aesthetic experience than about her as a person. This wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. In our modern world, we've turned love into performance art. We craft the perfect date, curate the perfect photo, write the perfect caption. We're not building relationships, we're building content. We're not falling in love. We're falling in love with the story we're telling about falling in love. This is what Kierkegaard called living aesthetically, always seeking the next beautiful moment, the next perfect feeling, the next transcendent experience. But here's the trap. Aesthetic living is fundamentally unstable. It depends on novelty, on intensity, on the constant pursuit of the new and exciting. When you approach love aesthetically, you're not building something sustainable. You're chasing a high. And like any high, it inevitably fades, leaving you empty and searching for the next fix. Consider how we talk about love today. We speak of sparks and chemistry, of love at first sight and soulmates. All of these concepts are fundamentally aesthetic. They're about feeling, about sensation, about the immediate and the intense. But what happens when the spark dims? What happens when the chemistry becomes routine? What happens when your soulmate reveals themselves to be simply human? This is where most modern relationships die. Not in betrayal or conflict, but in the slow recognition that reality cannot sustain fantasy. The person you're with starts to feel ordinary because you've been conditioned to believe that love should always feel extraordinary. You begin to wonder if you've settled because you've been taught that true love should make you feel like you're flying. Kierkegaard saw this pattern everywhere in his society, and it's only gotten worse in ours. We've created a culture where ordinary love, the kind that shows up every day, that chooses commitment over feeling, that finds beauty in routine, seems like failure. We've made the temporary permanent and the permanent temporary. The aesthetic. Lover is always restless, always comparing, always wondering if there might be someone better out there. They scroll through social media and see other couples who seem happier, more passionate, more perfect. They watch romantic movies and wonder why their own relationship doesn't feel like a fairy tale. They read about other people's love stories and question whether they've found the one. This constant comparison is poison to love because it makes presence impossible. You cannot be fully present with someone when you're always wondering if you should be somewhere else with someone else. You cannot give your heart completely when you're keeping part of it in reserve, just in case something better comes along. The aesthetic approach to love also creates what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, the tendency for the intensity of positive emotions to diminish over time, requiring ever greater stimulation to achieve the same level of satisfaction. In relationships, this manifests as a constant need for novelty, excitement, and intensity. The quiet moments of companionship start to feel boring. The routine expressions of care start to feel insufficient. The steady presence of love starts to feel like absence because it's not dramatic enough to register on your emotional radar. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of aesthetic love is how it corrupts your ability to receive love. When you're focused on how love makes you feel, you miss the thousand small ways that love is offered to you every day. You become blind to the cup of coffee brought to you in bed, the hand that reaches for yours in the dark, the way someone remembers your favorite song. You're waiting for grand gestures while missing gentle presences. This is why Kierkegaard's decision to break his engagement was so profound. He recognized that his love for Regina had become about him, his feelings, his spiritual development, his aesthetic experience rather than about her. He saw that he was using her as a means to his own transcendence rather than loving her as an end in herself. And he had the courage to admit that this wasn't love at all, no matter how beautiful it felt. Here's where Kierkegaard offers us a way out of the aesthetic trap, the transition from aesthetic to ethical existence. While aesthetic living chases feeling, ethical living chooses commitment. While aesthetic love depends on the other person being perfect, ethical love commits to loving them as they are. This isn't settling, it's growing up. The ethical stage of love recognizes something that aesthetic love cannot. That real love is not about finding the right person, but about choosing to be the right person for someone else. It's not about what you feel, but about what you do. It's not about the intensity of your emotions, but about the consistency of your choices. When Kierkegaard broke his engagement with Regina, he wasn't just protecting her from his own complexity, he was demonstrating the difference between aesthetic and ethical love. Aesthetic love says, I love you because of how you make me feel. Ethical love says, I love you because I choose to love you, regardless of how I feel on any given day. This is revolutionary thinking in our culture of feeling-based decision-making. We've been taught that if the feeling fades, the love must be over. We've been conditioned to believe that if we're not constantly happy in our relationships, we must be in the wrong relationship. But Kierkegaard understood that this kind of thinking makes genuine love impossible. Ethical love doesn't mean accepting abuse or staying in genuinely harmful situations. It means recognizing that love is a practice, not just a feeling. It means understanding that the person you're with will disappoint you, will fail to meet. Your expectations will be human in all the ways that humans are human, and it means choosing to love them anyway. This requires something our aesthetic culture has forgotten how to do. It requires you to know yourself well enough to make choices that aren't based on immediate gratification. It requires you to develop the capacity for genuine commitment, which means accepting that love will sometimes be boring, sometimes be difficult, sometimes require you to act against your immediate desires. The ethical lover doesn't ask, "How does this person make me feel?" but rather, "How can I choose to love this person well?" This shift in perspective changes everything about how relationships work. In the ethical stage, you begin to understand that love is not something that happens to you. It's something you do. It's not a feeling you fall into. It's a commitment you make. It's not about finding someone who completes you. It's about becoming someone worthy of love and capable of giving it. This means developing what Kierkegaard called repetition, the ability to find depth and meaning in the recurring patterns of daily life. Instead of constantly seeking novelty and intensity, you learn to find richness in routine, beauty in the ordinary, transcendence in the mundane. You discover that love is not found in the extraordinary moments, but created in the ordinary ones. Ethical lover understands that every relationship will go through seasons. There will be spring seasons of new growth and excitement, summer seasons of abundance and joy, autumn seasons of letting go and acceptance, and winter seasons of endurance and faith. The aesthetic lover abandons ship at the first sign of winter, always seeking eternal spring. But the ethical lover commits to weathering all seasons, understanding that each one has its own gifts and challenges. This doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned. Ethical love is active love. It chooses daily to create conditions where love can flourish. It communicates clearly, forgives generously, appreciates consistently, and serves willingly. It works to become the kind of person who is capable of sustaining love rather than demanding that love sustain them. But the ethical stage also has its limitations. While it moves beyond the selfishness of aesthetic love, it can become calculating, dutiful, even grim in its determination to do the right thing. You can find yourself going through the motions of love without the heart being fully engaged. You can become so focused on being ethical that you lose sight of joy, spontaneity, and genuine affection. This is where Kierkegaard recognized the need for something beyond even ethical love, a stage that includes both the beauty of the aesthetic and the commitment of the ethical, but transcends them both in its recognition of the sacred mystery that true love represents. But Kierkegaard didn't stop at the ethical stage. He recognized that even ethical love, love based on commitment and choice, could become a kind of trap if it wasn't grounded in something deeper. This is where he introduced what he called the religious stage of existence. Not necessarily religious in a traditional sense, but religious in its recognition of the mystery and transcendence that authentic love requires. Religious love, in Kierkegaard's framework, begins with a paradox. It recognizes that you cannot truly love another person until you understand your own radical incompleteness. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot offer genuine love if you're still trying to use love to fix yourself, to complete yourself, to save yourself from your own existential anxiety. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of Kierkegaard's thinking about love. He suggests that authentic love requires you to first confront your own relationship with existence itself. Why are you seeking love? What are you hoping it will do for you? What emptiness are you trying to fill? What fear are you trying to escape? Most of us enter relationships as beggars, desperately seeking someone else to validate our worth, to make us feel complete, to save us from our own loneliness and mortality. But this kind of need masquerading as love is what Kierkegaard called despair, a fundamental disconnection from authentic existence. When you love from despair, you're not really loving the other person. You're loving what you hope they can do for your own pain. Religious love, by contrast, begins with acceptance. Acceptance of your own limitations, your own mortality, your own fundamental aloneness in existence. It recognizes that no other person can complete you because completion is not the point. The point is to love authentically from wherever you are, whoever you are, without needing the other person to be anything other than who they are. This kind of love is rare because it requires tremendous courage. It means loving without guarantees, without the promise of happiness, without the assurance that your love will be returned or that it will last forever. It means loving because love itself is valuable, not because of what love can get you. When you love religiously, in Kierkegaard's sense, you love the person in front of you rather than your idea of them. You love them in their full humanity rather than despite it. You love them as they are rather than as you need them to be. This is the kind of love that can survive disappointment, that can grow through difficulty, that can find joy in ordinary moments because it's not dependent on extraordinary feelings. Religious love understands what Kierkegaard called the teleological, suspension of the ethical, the recognition that sometimes love requires you to act beyond conventional moral categories, to love in ways that don't make sense from a purely rational or ethical standpoint. This doesn't mean abandoning ethics, but rather recognizing that the deepest kind of love sometimes calls us to transcend our own self-interest and even our own understanding. In practical terms, this might mean staying with someone through illness when it would be easier to leave. It might mean forgiving someone who has hurt you deeply, not because they deserve it, but because love calls you to forgiveness. It might mean sacrificing your own dreams for someone else's well-being, not out of duty, but out of a love so deep that their flourishing becomes more important than your own happiness. But religious love also includes what might seem like its opposite, the willingness to let go when love requires it. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to release someone from your expectations, your needs, your claims on their life. Sometimes love means stepping back so that the other person can become who they're meant to be, even if that doesn't include you. This is the deepest paradox of religious love. It holds both attachment and detachment simultaneously. It loves completely, while grasping nothing. It commits fully while remaining open to whatever love might require. It finds the eternal in the temporal, while accepting the temporary nature of all earthly relationships. The religious lover understands that love is not ultimately about two people finding happiness together, though that may be one of its fruits. Love is about participating in something larger than yourself, something that connects you to the fundamental mystery of existence itself. When you love religiously, you're not just relating to another person. You're relating to the divine spark within them, the sacred mystery of their existence, the incomprehensible gift of their being. This doesn't make religious love easier than aesthetic or ethical love. In many ways, it's the most demanding of all. It requires you to love without possessing, to commit without controlling, to care without manipulating. It asks you to find the eternal in the midst of the temporary, the infinite in the midst of the finite, the sacred in the midst of the ordinary. But it also offers something that neither aesthetic nor ethical love can provide: the possibility of loving truly, of loving as love itself loves, without conditions, without guarantees, without the need for love to be anything other than what it is. This is the kind of love that transforms not just relationships, but the people who dare to practice it. This is what Kierkegaard discovered through his own struggle with love: that the greatest danger of idealizing love is not that it leads to disappointment, but that it prevents us from ever experiencing love at all. When we're busy chasing the perfect feeling, we miss the imperfect person. When we're hunting for our soulmate, we overlook the soul that's actually available. When we're waiting for love to save us, we never learn how to love. The question isn't, whether you'll find perfect love. The question is whether you'll develop the capacity to love imperfectly, authentically, courageously, and whether that will be enough. The question is whether you'll have the courage to love religiously, to find the sacred in the ordinary, to touch the eternal through the temporary vessel of another human heart. And perhaps most importantly, the question is whether you'll stop waiting for someone else to teach you how to love, and instead become a student of love itself, learning its rhythms, practicing its disciplines, submitting to its mysteries, and allowing it to transform you into the kind of person capable of both giving and receiving the love that makes life worth living.